Hey everyone, this is smpratte, and today we're going to talk about one of the most iconic sets in Pokemon, Neo Destiny. Neo Destiny is hands down one of the most important and historic sets ever released in the hobby. It's definitely top 3, it's right up there with first edition base. It was originally released in Japan 2001, in English 2002. Actually, today's its 15th anniversary, February 28th, as of making this video. It was released one day after Pokemon Day. There were 113 cards in this set, both English and Japanese, which is a pretty large set, especially for the Neo era. That's significantly larger than any of the other Neo sets released. Partly why it was such a large set is because it was the first and last set to feature light Pokemon. So light Pokemon were a counterbalance to dark Pokemon, and I'm sure most people are aware of dark Pokemon from the 2000 Rocket set. Basically every evolved Pokemon in Rocket was dark. Dark Flareon, Dark Vaporeon, Dark Charmeleon, Dark Golduck, etc. And basically the concept behind that is dark Pokemon are aggressive. In fact, in Japanese, I think it literally translates to evil. So these dark Pokemon were aggressive with typically lower HP, higher attack. Of course, not every Pokemon fit that generalization, Dark Charizard. But nonetheless, the point is that they're angry, they're pissed, they're dark. You get the idea. Where with light Pokemon, it was the opposite. They had higher HP, typically lower attack, trying to highlight that they're the nice guys, they're not really fighters. And for me, what I really love about this dichotomy are the species that had a print in both light and dark. So if you take a look at Machoke or Golduck or the evolutions, if you look at Machoke in Rocket, dark Machoke looks like he's roid raging, tossing a boulder, where light Machoke in Neo Destiny, I think, is snuggled up next to a flower. So it's a great, it's a great balance. And Jolteon, I think light Jolteon is sleeping with a Togepi in Neo Destiny, and then dark Jolteon in Rocket looks like a stray rabid dog. So it really delivers that nice, that nice collecting appeal. And this is a great example of something that is rewarding for collectors, but it doesn't hurt your wallet at all. Any of those cards I mentioned are not going to break the bank whatsoever. But it still provides you with not only unique artwork, but a nice little, mix of diversity there. You got something that's the polar opposite, but the same species. So I really liked the idea of light Pokemon. Unfortunately, this was the only set it was available in, but that's what bolsters Neo Destiny. That's one of the first aspects of Neo Destiny. Neo Destiny has numerous first and last inside of itself. So, speaking of first and last, this was the last set to feature the WotC first edition stamp. The Wizards of the Coast coveted first edition stamp dies with Neo Destiny. It was only available for 3 years. I would say it was out there for a little more than 3 years because it was on the shelves a little bit longer, but technically from 1999 to 2002, that's it for the WotC stamp. And speaking just the idea of first edition alone, I think by and large most collectors want the first edition stamp to return. More specifically, what most collectors want, or what they should want, is that you want a first edition print run to be just one run and then it's done, and then you keep printing unlimited, in that time frame. Usually there's a window of like a year and a half, however long it is that the set is available, and you want unlimited to, continue to be printed in that time frame. That way you provide, again, going back to diversity, you provide a more diverse market. It provides collectors that option if they want to go after the first edition stamp. There's more of a challenge for that. Typically it's a little bit pricier. It's just a little more difficult to obtain. And then for the unlimited, if for some reason, let's say you had a first edition card that was worth $100, but because there was so much unlimited product out there, the comparable product was worth $10, you have that option to buy the same card but without the stamp for $10. So I think that's what's so great about that first edition run and unlimited. It gives you options, and it simply is left to the collector to decide. If you want to go after this card, or if you can, you have that option, the first edition, or if you want the cheaper route with the same exact artwork without the stamp, you also have that option. So I think pretty much everyone across the board who's a collector would value that first edition stamp, and more specifically that setup where you had the one print run and then unlimited. And that's what WotC did. WotC did that so well, and that's partly why a lot of the old Wizards of the Coast cards are so collectible, is because of that setup. Because you had first edition only one print, therefore it's going to have less quantity down the road. It's just exactly what I think everybody wants. This was the last set for that. Also, this was the last set for the card design. So after Neo Destiny, Expedition was the next set that followed, and they had this new E-card design, which I'm sure most people are familiar with. The E-card design had data in the card that could be used for the e-reader for the Game Boy. Basically, each card had specific data, and you would swipe it. And it's unfortunate because it's kind of a blessing in disguise, because this was the end of the original WotC era. And what I mean by that is that most people term the original WotC era from base to Neo Destiny. And if you look at the price point for first edition high graded cards, everything from base to Neo Destiny is usually going to have a premium, because that's considered the original WotC era. I think moving forward with the sustainability of Pokemon, it might just, that term might extinguish over time, and it might just be the WotC era with the E cards included. But there is a collectability for this old design, not simply because it's nostalgic and it's just older guys buying it. Not simply because of that. There's more of a logical side behind it. And what I mean by that is, when this card was printed, the second this was released, this became an artifact. This was immediately put in this was inherently put in a time capsule the second the E-card design was printed. Therefore, why this has such an added value, or those original WotC cards have an added value or premium to them, is because they were never going to be printed this way ever again. A good example of that, going outside of Neo, is for me when I started collecting again seriously back in the mid-2000s. I remember when Dragon Frontiers was a new set, if you can imagine that. I remember going to stores and seeing Dragon Frontiers on the shelves for the first time, and I remember looking at these cards and buying a couple packs and being like, wow, these look so much, they look so different from what I used to know in the WotC era. So, and fast forward to today, that original EX era with Dragon Frontiers and the Gold Stars, those now look old. Those are now artifacts, because why? You had multiple other card styles released after that EX era that pushed it back further and further on the timeline. So that original WotC is all the way in the beginning, EX is right here now, and then now you have the more modern EX, and then you have, of course, the GX, the current. So basically back then, for me, Dragon Frontiers was new, and now Dragon Frontiers has become more of an artifact. It's become something that, that original EX style is much different than what you see today. So I think that's a good example to explain why the original WotC era isn't simply just all the old guys, the old generation and nostalgia, and they have deep pockets. That's part of the equation. But the other part of the equation is there is an inherent difference. And this is, definitely the oldest card style, and it is inherently just an artifact because of the later prints with different styles. So that's not everything for Neo Destiny. You thought that was it. We still have one more layer to go with Neo Destiny. So the last but not least for Neo Destiny are the 8 fucking shining cards in Neo Destiny. There are 8 shining cards in Neo Destiny. It's ridiculous. You thought that was already good enough with great artwork from bottom to the top, all this historical value going on. On top of that, there's 8 shining cards. There's more shining cards in the set than any other set ever. Of course, there's only 2 sets with shining cards, but this one said, let me show you how shining cards are done. Not only did they give you 8, they gave you 8 with a unique hollow pattern. Before this, the hollow pattern was different. And you could, I don't know if you catch it there on the camera, but the hollow pattern for Gyarados was just a normal hollow pattern, like a hollow card, or more specifically the Japanese. This is a Japanese version, so it's just a standard hollow card, but the card art was a shining Gyarados, where with Neo Destiny, the only shining part of the card is the actual species. So I think this is not only a unique new style, this style is essentially what is used today for full arts. So this style is somewhat of a textured art. It's definitely something that looks embossed, or it looks like it's three-dimensional, if you will. It looks like it has some depth to it, where hollow's just straight on it. And I think this is basically the beginning of that textured art, if you will, or that textured full art style, which we're all accustomed to today, and I think most people prefer. So not only were there 8 shining Pokemon, they had that unique art. More specifically, I think Neo Destiny, if you had to term it up, give it a nickname, or it'd be the Transcendence set. It's not much of a nickname, but that's what it is. It's just a set that transcends itself. Like, shining Pokemon are almost a subset of Neo Destiny. And what I mean by that is, I think people collect shining Pokemon and they might not bother with the light or dark or the other hollow cards, because shining Pokemon become a subset in themselves because they are so popular. They are such a challenge to obtain. Also, there's one of every energy type featured. So Neo Revelations had water, and then Neo Destiny came through with every other energy type. And not only that, it's usually popular Pokemon. Magikarp, Gyarados, they're popular. Charizard, of course, is extremely popular. Raichu, Mewtwo, Steelix, Tyranitar, Celebi, those are all pretty popular species. So not only do you have one of each energy, you also have popular species as well with unique holo pattern. So as you can see, there is so much going on in Neo Destiny. It is objectively one of the most influential and important sets in Pokemon. Moreover, I don't think another set will ever compete with Neo Destiny's relevance. Because part of Neo Destiny, it's very fitting that its name is Neo Destiny. Because part of its destiny is that it's something that I don't think can ever be replicated. Where you had the end of the WotC first edition stamp, you had the end of that card template, you have the first and last of light Pokemon, and then you have 8 shining Pokemon with that unique style, with the Pokemon being the shining aspect, only featured in that set, with the exception of the Shining Magikarp Fan Club Japanese promo. But for set cards, that was the only time you had that holo pattern featured. So there's just so much going on in Neo Destiny. I could probably break each segment down and why it's so important to the hobby separately, but in general, it's just clearly one of the most historic sets. Why I think base is always going to be first is because it is the first. It has all of the inertia. It's the genesis of Pokemon, and it's rightfully in that first spot. Neo Destiny's right underneath it. I'm talking right underneath it. It's right there with first edition base set. There's so much history and so much importance and value in this set. It's something I don't think you'll ever be able to see again. Even if you had a set where they threw in a whole bunch of secret rares or ultra rares or hyper rares, whatever the current rarity is, it's just not going to compare to everything that's going on in Neo Destiny. So, as usual, if you have any questions, suggestions, let me know. If you want me to break this down more specifically, I can. I could talk about one segment, from each of these in its own video. But as usual, give me your suggestions. Until next time.